Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Building Loved Businesses, the show where we explore the journey of business leaders and entrepreneurs who are building businesses that their employees, customers, and communities truly love. I'm your host, Nathan Schock, and today I'm joined by Joe Slavens. He's part of a multi-generation company in Davenport, Iowa, that's been involved in banking and real estate and software and tax and accounting and all kinds of fun things over nearly a century of growth and reinvention. This story is remarkable, from his grandfather's Depression-era persistence to the family's acquisition and leadership of Northwest Bank and Trust. And a lot more in between. So let's get after it. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Nathan. It's exciting to be here.
So let's start where you started the last time we talked about this, back in 1933. Tell me that story of your grandfather leaving Cincinnati, Iowa during the Depression, and how that shaped the future of your family.
So my grandfather was a barber. It's 1933. My father is 1 year old. My uncle's yet to be born. They're in a small town in southern Iowa. My grandfather and my great-grandfather are both barbers. And my grandfather recognizes the fact that the town's too small to have two barbers. So he literally packs up his wife, his son, and all of his belongings and puts them in a car and says, we have to go someplace else because the Depression, the size of the community we're in isn't going to support our family. So he gets in the car and drives until he reaches Newton, Iowa. And there's a sign up where the Newton's big enough that they've got a 2-chair barbershop. And so he goes in and auditions in the afternoon while my grandmother and my father sit in the car, and he gets the job. And two interesting things happen from there on kind of in Newton. The first is that my grandfather makes money on the side because it's a Depression. He goes to the banker and says, I could sell cars for you. So he sells cars while he's, cutting somebody's hair, give him a shave and says, isn't that a good looking car? He cleans it up. And so he sells repo cars. And he wants more, and he applies either 5 or 6 times to Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company to an ad that was in a newspaper, and he was rejected until the last time, and he was ultimately hired because of persistence, and he got the job to become a one-man store operator, and over time worked his way to where he had the Davenport store, which was one of the larger stores in the state. And did well there, selling tires. Ultimately, ended up putting a horse on his inventory report. And the the regional manager came down and said, Joe, we don't, we're in the tire business. We don't take horses in. And Joe said, well, I made money on the horse. And they said, don't take another horse. And at that moment, Joe realized the fact that he was in the business of making money, and Goodyear Tire and Rubber was in the business of selling tires. And sometimes that didn't overlap. He wanted to make money. So he opened Slavens Tires. An independent tire salesman, and then realized that there was a lot of construction going on now. We're now in the late 40s at this point in time, and there's money being made. There's people are buying appliances. So he becomes Slavens Tire and Appliance. And then he realizes that, boy, there's been money being made in this real estate, and he could not just sell it to him, but he got in the process of building houses and then ultimately apartments, concluding with a large apartment complex in the early 1960s. During construction, he passed away. But a little time before he had passed away, he had the opportunity to flip a piece of property into a small investment in a very small bank called Northwest Bank and Trust Company. So he invested an amount to own 5% of a company that owned 5% of a company that owned 50% of the bank. Well, my father by that time had graduated from law school, was practicing law, and represented the bank and represented the family in the transaction, put rights of first refusal in. So over the 1960s, the family would pick up a little bit of stock. By the way, my grandfather does pass away in 1964, about 4 months before I'm born, so I never got a chance to meet him. But obviously, oral history of the family is pretty good here. So we've got a lot of. I kind of feel like I know him through pictures and through the oral history that had been told. And with these rights of first refusals, ultimately the majority ownership of the bank comes up for sale because of a change in banking regulations that the majority shareholder had to sell. And my father and my uncle at that point, both attorneys, looked at each other and said, hey, let's give this banking business a try. And so they exercised it to the shock of the seller. They exercised their right of first refusal, borrowed $1 million in 1970, which was a lot of money then, and closed down the law practice and went to work in banking. 70s were, go ahead, Nathan, sorry.
Yeah. Wow. I'm just like all of this, First, finish through on the bank, right? Of the
Sure.
acquisition of Northwest Bank and Trust.
So they
Yeah.
acquired the bank. It was a $22 million bank. The 1970s were a very good time in Iowa, in the Midwest, and so they grew to about $150 million over that time period. The 80s came, and the Quad Cities, which is Davenport's part of, we were the farm implement capital of the world. So while we didn't have direct exposure to the ag lending, we had it indirectly. And in a 4-month period, we went from 3 or 4% unemployment to 25% unemployment because nobody was buying tractors.
Right.
And during the 80s, very, very difficult time to survive. Many banks closed in Iowa. Many banks had to be recapitalized by their parents. We were a very high leveraged organization, but through my father and my uncle's wits and hard work, they were able to survive that. Of course, then you had the Tax Reform Act of, I think it's 1985 or 86. That changed how real estate was worked in terms of returns. We were a real estate bank. So then we go through that crisis. During that time period, the next generation comes along. I followed my father's footsteps and had training as an attorney after working in a bank in Chicago for a little while. Came back and joined the family, and so cut my teeth on workouts. And one of the great
Yeah.
things there's a lot of great things about banking, but two of them are voyeurism, just the opportunity to watch, what is going on in the world because you see everything as the banker. And the second is to learn how all businesses work. There
Yeah.
are things that are in common in business, and there are things that are different by industry. And so it was great to be able to work. Well, then I guess the last game, maybe I should say the third thing is the honesty and integrity of people that borrow money from you. And you could,
Right.
everybody who's challenged financially, has struggles. But if you can build trust, you can accomplish so much more with people than if you become adversarial or you learn. Unfortunately, some people just aren't able or willing to go down that path of being cooperative and trustworthy and transparent in their relationships. And so you learn to read people very, very well as
Yeah.
a part of that. Never turned
Yeah.
that into any poker winnings, but I suspect that.
but don't rule it out in the future, right? No.
That's right. That's
It,
right.
so I think I heard you say that they owned 5% of a company that owned 5% of a company that owned 50%. Did I get that right?
You got that right. It was a
Wow.
minuscule amount of ownership that they had at that
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah. But
Just
the right of first refusal is what shocked both shocked the seller, right?
Yeah,
You
exactly. I
know,
mean, they thought they were giving a notice to say, just to a courtesy notice, and all of a sudden, and again, the seller doesn't care. I mean, as long
right.
as you fulfill the deal,
No.
they get the same amount of money. They get the
Yeah.
closing, and
Yeah.
they're happy. But they were quite surprised when my uncle and my father stepped in and exercised that
Yeah.
right.
It strikes me, Joe, as you look back, right? Like um, the persistence to do that, right, and the kind of grit to get in, and clearly that came from your grandfather, right? To say going from barbering to being turned down by Goodyear so many times, and then all those levels of entrepreneurship. That how is that alive in the family business today?
Well, let me say, yeah, I think my grandfather did start it, but I got to give my grandmother a lot of credit too, because there's always somebody
Mm.
there, sort of like
Oh
we
yeah.
use the term sweeping up after the elephants, and she was always there, trusting in what her husband was doing. Ultimately, my grandfather died in 1964. She lived as a widow for 46 years, supporting the entrepreneurial decisions of my uncle and my father, and so
Wow.
that was a consistent, a force, if you will. I think, I'll say that, believing in yourself. We have a family motto: hard work beats talent, but nothing beats hardworking talent. And the first part's pretty easy. You can outwork somebody, and you can control that. You don't necessarily control how much talent you have, but you can control how hard you work. And I think that was always so hard work was a clear family value. The other side of that equation or that statement is that nothing nothing beats hardworking talent. Find
Yeah.
things you're good at and work hard at them. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
5'7", 165 pounds. I don't care how hard I work. I'm not going to be successful in the NBA, at least on the
Yeah.
floor. I guess maybe I could, be in a back office and have a chance. But the point is, find things where you have natural gifts and the ability to, where your strengths are, and put your hard work into that. And the odds are you're going to have much more success.
Yeah. My grandpa was quite an entrepreneur too, and he wrote several books. One of them was a joke book, and in it he said, "Behind every successful man is a woman rolling her eyes." So that's a little
There
similar.
you go. Yep.
But now what was it like, right, getting into banking and being in banking during those turbulent 80s, right? The farm
Sure.
crisis, commercial real estate crisis, and all that. How did that shape the experience and what led to the family business, your approach to risk and lending and all of that?
Sure. Well, I think that first of all, I first was exposed to the business on the back of cars during tailgates during Iowa football games, and so I understood that it was that business in many senses is a numbers game. And you're not going to win 100% of the time, but you have to, depending on the business that you're in, you have to win more than you lose. It's not like there's not a lot like baseball where you can, get it right 30% of the time and be an all-star. And
Right.
so I was steeped in the, sort of the laws of large numbers, and that, you had to go out and do deals and do things, and that not all of them and you had to be willing to say that not all of them, either on a loan deal or a relationship you're going to try and build, they weren't all going to be successful.
Yeah.
But if you could be successful more than, I'll say, half or three-quarters of the time, whatever the industry required, then you were going to be successful. So you have to do things, is the point. That was the first thing that you learned, is that, because you can be frozen by fear and you can be frozen by risk. And
Yeah.
and what you have to, Federer recently gave a great talk, a graduation speech about his career, and I think he won something like 54% of the points that he played in his career, but he won like 80% of the matches, maybe not,
Yeah.
maybe 85. And so that
Yeah.
that that sums up, if you will, even in sports, sort of having the entrepreneurial spirit to be willing to fail. And so,
Yes.
but just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and every decision you make, make sure it's based upon the past, but maybe things have changed, and you're in a continuous learning cycle. And then the last, I think, thing that I would say about that is, there are certain things you can't control. There are certain risks that are unknown, the unknown unknowns. And again, you can be paralyzed by those, or you can simply say, I'm going to ignore them, because that's really all you can do, is ignore those things, because sometimes you're
Yeah.
going to get lucky, they're going to go your way, and sometimes they're not. The only advice that I guess the thing that I learned along the way was, don't be one step from failure.
Mm.
Try and at least be two steps from failure, because those unknowns, they're going to
Yeah.
come out, they're going to jump on you, they're going to grab you, they're going to do
Yeah.
something to you. And so if you're one step away from failure, that one gets you. And
Yeah.
there was an old joke. My dad loved to travel by air, and he had a lot of comments there. But he used to have a joke that he says, everywhere I travel, I carry a bomb on the airplane. I hope TSA is not watching this. I guess he's deceased now. But and he said, what are the odds of there being two bombs? And
Yeah.
so I think that was the lesson in terms of risk management. Don't worry about the things you can't control. Work hard
Yeah.
to understand the things you can control, and then try and be at least one step away, or two steps away from disaster
Yeah.
as you're making decisions going forward.
Yeah, that joke was back when you could actually make a joke like that.
That's right.
Today they won't let you anymore. Now, so you started to talk about your entry into the business.
Mhm.
Catch us up on that. How did you
Sure.
come to be a part of this, the family business?
Well, I guess you'd say from the beginning, from the moment I can remember, I always wanted to work with my dad. I knew that he worked with his brother. I knew that he worked with his father and his mother. That was wired into me from the beginning. So, no matter what he'd been doing, I was gonna be with him. That was my hope.
Yeah,
And so, again, he was able to help me get a job in Chicago as a credit analyst at a bank that was, we have the little banks have big bank, kind of like big brother, big sister banks that they work
yeah,
with. I went and worked there and got some experience. Went to law school, which was a great a great preparation to go into banking. We regulate money in this country more than we regulate anything else, because we're a capitalist
yeah,
society. And so being an attorney really, really dials you into having a great preparation for being a banker. I joined the bank as a bank's attorney, did all kinds of, I had one client, if you will, the family, and I did a whole variety of legal work, got exposed to
mhm,
everything in the bank. Again, spent a lot of time on, unfortunately, having to foreclose on properties or work with borrowers who were in trouble, to help them, work their way through it. But love those success stories more than nothing
yeah,
worse than getting a sheriff's sale deed. I mean, that's the ultimate, failure, if you will, in the process.
yeah,
And then over time, I had the opportunity to work in our trust department, and be the work with him for about 5 years and turn that business around. It was a losing proposition, a losing division, and we made it a profitable division during my tenure doing that. Then ultimately moved into lending, because that's really the bread and butter of banking. Is it doesn't true anymore, but they used to have what they call the 363 rule, and that was, you paid your depositors 3%, you charged your borrowers 6%, and you're on the golf course by 3 o'clock. Now I never golfed, so I guess I tried to do better than that. But that's the basic business, and the bigger you are, the more you could get a 3% or 4% spread on, the better you
Yeah.
did. And so I went out and used the experience that I had and made loans. Ultimately, again, given the fact that we were a highly leveraged organization at our holding company, my father and my uncle were um, they liked leverage. We were a very
Mhm.
highly leveraged organization. We were not able to grow quite as quickly. We realized as a family business. I had a couple of cousins in the business, a brother-in-law, my father, my uncle. That at the end of the day, we were going to have, we needed to have. There were too many mouths to feed, I guess is what you would say
Yeah.
at a
Yeah.
leadership level. And so I
Right.
made the decision to try and buy my uncle out. My father's, and the way I described it, allowed me to play his cards. Uh, and so I structured a deal to buy my uncle's family's interest out. It was a very complex deal, given the leverage that we had, given the fact that it was a highly regulated industry. It was going to take 5 years to execute the plan, but
Mhm.
that's kind of how we do things. We are long ball players, and so we executed the plan. About 2 years into the plan, my father passed away. Fortunately,
Mhm.
my uncle, a man of his word, looked at me and said, "Hey, I made a deal with your brother. My brother, that deal's good with you." Little side story. I hope that, again, if I go off on too many tangents, let me know. But my grandfather, before he died, had a best friend. He was a construction guy, and he couldn't get health insurance. And so my grandfather in the early 60s promised to provide this gentleman, his best friend, health insurance the rest of his life. When my grandfather died, my father and uncle said, "We keep my grandfather's name was Joe. We keep Joe's promises."
Mhm.
And so they provided health insurance for this gentleman, for the rest of his life. Well, the rest of his
Wow.
life actually ended up being longer than my father's life. So after my father passed away, I said, "We keep promises in the family." And so I
Yeah.
provided health insurance for this gentleman until he died. I would say at least a decade after my father had died. So we have
Oh, wow.
I think we're a high, if you go back to family values, we're a
Yeah.
high integrity. Our word is our bond. We make it happen. So we
Yeah.
made that. As I borrowed money to pay off my father and my uncle's debt, borrowed my own money. Um, and had a good run during the 2000s. Paying off debt. The Great Recession comes along and slows everything down, and went into retrenched, if you will, and ultimately in 2017 became debt free. Along the way, again being entrepreneurial in the late 90s, my dad allowed me to start a software as a service business out of a
Yeah.
compliance project in the mid 90s. Um, we also we reignited our trust powers and really began to grow that about 15 years ago. Again, that was the key. There was hiring the right person to lead it. Learned that
Yeah.
lesson very early on. Late two About 2000, boy, 15, 16. My son-in-law joined us. A couple of years later, my son joined us. We started the process of, we said, our board of directors always loved having an independent board of directors. I was very proud of the fact that we were probably one of the smallest financial institutions, but we had the singular best board of directors of any of the
Mhm.
banks. And they were all jealous of me for doing that. But I always thought having my dad, another lesson in our family is you become who you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
And so if I wanted to be a successful business person, smart, capable, I was going to surround myself with high integrity, high success people
Yeah.
to be my advisors and my role models. And
Yeah.
they actually cooked, three of them sort of in a meeting, cooked up the idea that we should go into owning an accounting firm,
Yeah.
tax and accounting firm, not a CPA firm that does attest work, so to speak, but a tax and accounting firm that does the basic blocking, tackling of accounting and payroll and tax preparation, et cetera. So we bought a
Mhm.
very small one, and then subsequently acquired six more that were of different levels of success and a different size. And now we have a $5 million revenue business that is on the precipice of meeting all of the standards in the industry in terms of customer satisfaction and return on
Yeah.
investment. We're the fastest growing business in the Quad Cities. Our NPS score, net performer score of employees is 70, which is unheard of. Our customers have given us about a 25 on that, which is a very good rating. We want to get that up, but things are going extremely well in that business. So along the
Yeah.
way, we've owned real estate that the towers that all the real estate that the banks were in. That was contrary to what most banks did. We thought we did a good job managing real estate, so we did that because of our background in real estate. Um, Trying to think
I want
what
to
else
I want to get to the let me I want to get to the bank sale here in a
yeah.
second, Joe. But before I do that, you already talked about the 363, right? And
Yep.
And for that reason, and being a highly regulated industry, banks don't always get a lot of credit for being an entrepreneurial industry, right? So
Absolutely.
how did you maintain that tension of running a bank and then being entrepreneurial enough to build a software business and a trust business, and like, just maybe talk through how you navigated that.
Well, I think internally, we always described ourselves as business people in the business of banking and not bankers. And a lot of people who are in banking grab onto the mindset that they're bankers, and that comes with some good things, but that comes with some baggage, about not being entrepreneurial and on being risk averse in certain circumstances. Although let me comment on banking. Everybody calls bankers conservative. But name another business that makes its money by them taking their money, giving it to you with a promise you'll
Yeah,
pay it back. The
yeah,
reason they're considered conservative is because, in my opinion, they're actually in the most risky business that you could possibly be in.
yeah,
Again, going back to the entrepreneurship, I think that what we really wanted to look at is things that were aligned with banking. The software we sold to banks and other financial institutions.
mhm,
We had built relationships with our customers that allowed us to say, "Hey, we can do more for you than simply take your deposits. We can build a relationship that can go on beyond beyond your lifetime." The
yeah,
tax and accounting. We built relationships with lots of accountants around town, and so financial services, seemed to me to be that everything was linked together. And
yeah,
other organizations tried this to some extent or another. I think that the genesis for all these made natural sense. The regulatory bodies sort of looked at it as long as it was reasonably small, so to speak, then they kind of allowed us to do it. And then by the time we were able to build it, to something that got their attention, it was successful and it was
yeah,
making money. It had high quality people involved, and so I don't want to say we sort of came in the back door a little bit under the dark of night, and then built something that worked. And really, if you look at what's interesting is if you look at small banks, about 80% of their revenue it comes from what they call net interest margin, that 3-6 rule. If you
yep,
go to the larger an organization gets, the less their revenue and comes from the 3-6 rule. Again, that doesn't even apply, but that interest margin. Where you get to the larger banks, they're doing investment banking, they're doing all
yep,
kinds of other things where that number is like 50%. And so by the time that we got to the point of selling the organization, we'd gotten ours to the non-banking or the non-traditional banking things being about 40 or 45% of our revenue, which was very, very different from the rest of the banks that were our size. But it was more like the model that the whole world's headed to, and that is having non-interest income that represents a significant portion of your income statement.
yeah. Cool. Well, okay. So now, right, you're going through all this, and now the kind of the start, if you will, of the real size of the family business is the bank, and
Mhm.
now go back a few years and you sell the bank, right?
Yeah.
So,
So
but
so so actually,
there are
20.
these big structural changes going on in that industry, right? So, just
Yeah.
walk us through that decision and um, the all the challenges that came up as you tried to execute on that decision.
Yeah, so 2020 we wrote a strategic plan. We're big planners, and we tweak it along the way. We try and really double down every 5 years. I'm not sure that works anymore given the pace of change, but
Hmm.
and I'll get to that in a minute. But we had this, we had the trust, we had the tax and accounting, we had real estate, we had the bank, and we really thought sort of the financial supermarket. And so we put a plan in place and ran at that. I was sitting down about 18 months, 21 months later, doing the budget for 2022, and I looked at it and I said, where's this industry at? Where is it going? And is this really the answer? And I realized that when I started in banking, that there were 18,000 financial services organizations. There were now 5,000. That
Hmm.
when I started, that there were 13,000 that were smaller than us, and now there are only 700 that were smaller than us. We've had the birth of the fintech. We've had the growth of the credit union industry that does not have nearly the level of regulation and doesn't pay any taxes. We have the large banks that had, we've gone from uh, um, an unconcentrated industry where the four largest banks in the country had 80% of the banking business. And I looked at that and I said, boy, I don't want to be on the wrong side of this and be, I'll use the word, have to sell as opposed
Yep.
to get to sell.
Right.
And I sat down and I looked at the budget and I said, I got 45% of my revenue sitting outside of banking. Um, and I think that that at the end of the day, I'm in an industry that I'm not, at some point I'm going to be the smallest guy, and I'm not going to exist. I'm not going to have any power. And candidly, what I decided was I'm not able to execute the plan that I wanted to. And that is,
Right.
that a financial supermarket in today's day and age means Citigroup or Wells Fargo doing
Mhm.
those sorts of things. It doesn't mean a $250
Yeah.
million bank in Davenport, Iowa doing it. I just don't have the market influence or the access to capital to do that. And so sat down with my board of directors, made that case and said, I'm on the front end of this, not on the back end of this. So we're going to start the process.
Yeah.
And the process included considering partnering with fintechs. We had those discussions. We also went out and looked at a capital raise when Silicon Valley Bank went down. We had a deal put together to actually go nationwide and be a specialty bank. When Silicon Valley Bank went down, all the private equity and the funders said, "We're not doing anything right now."
Yeah.
Um, and then we actually turned and were connected to an international bank, a challenger bank, that looked at us, and we were very, very close to doing a deal with them. I got to signing day, and I won't go through the story, but and I looked at it in my constituencies, and I said, when I'm all said and done, my employees aren't going to love this, my customers aren't going to love this, and my community's not going to love this. I don't love this. And I picked up the
Mhm.
phone and I called the CEO overseas, and I said, I know we put a lot of time and energy and effort into this, but I'm not doing the deal.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
that was a hard decision to make because
Yeah.
I had nothing else going on at that point to sort of fulfill the strategy of saying I need to exit.
Yeah.
But so be it. Fortunately, Time Bank out of Park Ridge, Illinois, came along, and one of the things that we'd always said is that that I mean, there's something special about being in the Midwest. I worked in Chicago. We traveled to Chicago. These are Chicago Atlanta area people. They're family people. The gentleman who owns it has 14 kids. Seven of them work in the bank, and we hit it off. Our values are shared. How we treat
Yeah.
employees, how we treat customers. Our DNA aligned, and
Mhm.
so and then we built these outside businesses that again nobody wanted that was in banking. We
Yeah.
called them the ornaments, but we had the trust company, we had the real estate, we had the tax, and we had the software. And so they wanted the bank, they didn't want the other stuff, and so we were able to put a deal together very quickly, and it fit with the regulators, it fit with the customers, it fit everybody's goals, hand in glove. And so we put the deal together, and we closed on that transaction December 31st of 2024, and so we're about almost a year past that now.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So now we're at where we are today, right? You've taken
Yep,
those ornaments, and now you've built a family holding company. So just describe what the business is today, Joe. Give us a
sure.
picture of that.
So we have a trust company that's authorized to exercise fiduciary authority that has about 700 customers, and we manage about 550 million, or a little over $500 million in assets for those folks. We have a tax and accounting firm, and our trust company customers are the largest source of business for the
Yeah.
tax and accounting firm. The tax and accounting firm is the largest source of referrals to the trust company. So nice
Right.
synergies between those two, but operate entirely independently.
Yep.
And their interactions are what I would call out of their enlightened self-interest and the natural fit that they have together. But the tax and accounting firm has somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,500 payroll accounting and tax clients, generates about $5 million worth of revenue. Software company, we've had over the last 30 years had about probably 1,000 installs that we've done. But again, with the shrinkage of the industry, we have about 125 current customers that we service. Again, still out there selling, trying to get more. Even in a shrinking industry, there's lots of money to be made in being a provider to a dying industry, as long as you understand that you're selling to a dying industry
Right.
or an industry that's changing very rapidly and shrinking, I
Yep.
guess I should say. And then
Yeah.
we own our real estate. Again, the family's been in and out of real estate for forever. I guess after we stopped selling selling appliances to them, but building houses,
Yep.
doing subdivisions, building apartment complexes. So we have two commercial buildings that have about 100,000 square feet. We've got um, retail of about 5,000 square feet, with more that we're looking at. And then I personally have done a subdivision, and
Yeah.
if they say if you can't get what you want, you make it. But the point is that we have investment property, we have software, we have tax and accounting, and we have a trust company. And then we're on the lookout for other opportunities
Yeah.
that
Okay.
fit
Great.
fit for us.
Yeah. So let's talk about those fits, right? How do you evaluate those opportunities and decide what's the right fit for you?
So the first thing is obviously inorganic growth within our current industry. So we're looking to either purchase or partner with other people who are in the investment management business or have clients that are in that business. And so, that's a natural way to inorganically grow the top line and the bottom line of that business. We are we have discussions with other folks that look like the 7 accounting firms that we already acquired. That's an industry. Professional industries are changing because the people want to be practitioners. They want to provide great tax and accounting advice. They don't want to worry about HR, IT, and all the things about running a business, if you will. They want to be a professional,
Yeah.
and they also don't want to. They don't have capital, and the people who are exiting want to have capital. That
Right.
they can sell their business for. So as professionals continue to retire in our greater area, we're going to continue to have those conversations with them because I think it's been very successful for the 7 firms. Those that sold, the sellers are happy, the clients are happy. I mean, again, if you're a small accounting firm practice, what do you want? You want to get a buck and you want your clients to be happy, and you might want a place to go. As my dad used to say, a lot of professionals get married for better or for worse, but not for lunch. They want to continue at a lower pace to do what they did before, because that's
Yeah.
what most professionals really don't want to go home. They just want to scale back on things. So that's how we look at it, sort of inside, or I'll call it inside or inorganic growth. And then
Yeah.
outside, to me, it's, there's several factors that go into that. One of them is, what do I know about the business? The good news is, having been that voyeur, as we talked about earlier in banking, I got the
Yeah.
opportunity to see a lot of businesses, and come to understand where those industries are headed, which ones are growing, which ones are shrinking, what are the KPIs that are driving those businesses. um,
Hmm.
and the second thing I would say is that I would look at, not only do we have some familiarity and things, but the second would be the nature of the business in terms of just basic business blocking and tackling. We provide all those support services through our holding company to our businesses. Is this a business that has significant need for that? And they have expertise and talent, but they need capital. They need HR. They need IT. They need accounting. They need a building built for them, that sort of stuff. And so, are we a fit from that standpoint to come in and not only provide the capital, but provide those support services? Because again, a lot of the guys and gals that are really great at running their businesses, the management team is there, but the person who owns it's retired, doesn't want to be there, and we can partner with them to continue on, just like we did with the accounting firms. The other thing
Yeah.
that really interests me going forward is the whole idea of businesses that have regular recurring revenue.
Hmm.
I'm not to say you have to have this, and again, different people have different definitions of this, but I learned this in the software business. We learned this in the trust business. We learned this in the accounting business. Sure, we'll do a tax return and send you a bill, but we would rather be your partner and have you be on sort of a subscription basis, to have your payroll, to have your accounting, to have tax advice be a part of a package. So somebody, isn't writing one big check; they're writing several small checks on a continuous basis. And I think
Yeah.
that's where we see successful business people, successful businesses being, is that uh, the alarm industry,
Yeah.
the
Yep.
security industry, it's built on
Yep.
somebody paying $30 to monitor your alarm. And most of the time the
Yep.
alarm doesn't go off, but when it does, you pick up the phone, or they pick up the phone and say, do we need to send the police? Do we need to send the fire truck? What do we need to do? But there's all this, and I've got a friend who runs one of the Midwest's largest alarm companies, and it's based on, again, thousands of people writing a very small check with great
Yep.
regularity. And
Yep. I
so that's a
interviewed I interviewed an alarm company on the show earlier. Yep. I
okay.
know. Yeah.
So the point is that as we go out and look for that, we want to look for those businesses that have regular credit. Obviously, having people that have, you got to have talent. You got to have, I'm not looking, I'll provide operational support, I'll provide advice, guidance, and counseling, but somebody's going to get up in the morning and is and going to be there till late at night, running the show. And again, maybe we can find somebody to do that, but the reality is most of the opportunities are going to come where management is basically already in place,
Yeah.
to do the basic work that has to be done on a day-to-day basis to satisfy clients and justify sending out a bill.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're not looking to buy and kick them out. You're looking to partner, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, and I'm learning. We talked about those right of first refusals earlier, and my father and uncle did one of the things they did is they wound up owning 100%. And I've done that now with my uncle, and subsequently I'm working with other family. I still have some other family members that are involved, and I think it's important for us to consolidate ownership before something happens to me, because when something happens to me, it's going to be my two daughters and my son and their spouses, and so they're going to have to deal with all of that sort of
Yeah.
stuff and take care of their mother along the way. My wife, or somebody, I guess at that point. Um, so. Um, I think you constantly have to, sort of trim the ownership tree, uh, because otherwise it starts, becoming a burden as opposed to
Yep.
a strength of
Yep.
an organization.
Right. Yeah. So I heard inorganic growth, alignment or synergy with your existing businesses, the need for
Mm-hmm.
your support services, recurring revenue, and talent.
Yep.
That's the
That's the secret
pieces of the
recipe from
pie.
my
Yeah.
standpoint, again, but,
Yeah.
and again, the reality is, those are, and I'm going to add the word capital. I mean, because I
Yeah.
think, capital and labor are partners in all of these things. Labor ends up being, we kind of divide that into industry or operational support, those kinds of things. But, it's a partnership, and we have capital, and we have access to capital, to more
Right.
capital. And so, does it, I mean, that usually is probably, at the end of the day, one of the elements that's always going to be present. But I don't want to be a private equity firm per se that just, doles out
Yeah.
money. That doesn't really interest me. Do you get there at some point if you have more capital than you can self deploy? Sure, you find yourself there. But at this point in time, we're not there. We would rather deploy along with the things that we can bring to the table, rather than just the capital.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So now, as we've talked about your criteria and what you're looking for, we've talked about what the business looks like today and where it's come from. But now, no discussion of a family holding company would be complete without talking about the future.
Yeah.
So, what does it look like as you look out into the future? Whether it's what industries are you going to? How does the next generation get involved? What do you see for Northwest Investment Corp in the future?
Yeah, I think that, I'm 61. It's interesting. I don't sit and worry about death at all, but it's always ever present in my mind to say I don't want to leave people in a situation that they can't, work their way through. So, as I look at things, I want to be able to. One of the easy questions is, if something happens to me, what does that mean? What does that mean for that acquisition? What was the role that I played? How necessary was it, other than maybe the capital, and how will the next generation fit into that? And so it's pretty important to me, as I look forward at this point in time, to find things that, again, my absence, ultimately, that I'm an add, but I'm not a necessity, or that the necessity can come in through one of the other members of the family.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time, talking to the next generation about, what are they interested in and where are their talents, and asking them to try and drive acquisitions, and
Yeah.
examples of that. My oldest daughter is a school teacher that then got into preschool, and so, I think childcare is a huge industry that has regular recurring revenue, and we're making kids, and kids
Yeah.
need a safe, great place to go. And
Yeah.
so that's an industry that we've had some conversation about.
Hmm. Wow.
My other daughter is in healthcare. That's a tough one to get into, quite frankly,
Yeah.
because of the consolidation that's out there. But healthcare is an ever increasing portion of our GDP, and so asking the question,
Yes.
how do we get into healthcare? My
Yep.
son probably is going to stay in real estate. That's where his interest is. But the nice thing is he's real estate, but he's also a guy who understands relationships and sales. And so, that's a relationship, and sales is universal to all business. And if you've got that skill and that talent, we all know successful sales guys, and and gals, I'm sorry, they go across industries. They can transition between industries because they understand we build relationships, we sell the value that we have for, again, hopefully some regular recurring revenue. Um, the so I am very focused on, I think, industries that I think have upside, industries that are complementary, and industries that have the interest of the next, and the talent of the next generation.
Yeah. If Grandpa Joe were here, what do you think he would say about the future?
Oh, what would he say about the future? I think that what he would say is continue to experiment.
Yeah.
Be prepared to fail. Bet on yourself.
Yeah.
He'd probably encourage me to use more leverage. I'm not, I guess I say that because we came, when we did things as a family in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even again, until more recently, it was, and banking's the most leveraged industry in the, in the country.
Yep. Yep.
And then you double leverage it when you use debt at your holding company.
Yep.
Um, and again, so I think that, and I think he's right. I think to really become significant, that leverage is necessary. I guess the question is now from a lifestyle standpoint, do you sleep well at night not having leverage? And if once you
Right.
have amassed a certain level of capital, do you sit and say, do I really want to put it on the table? I think he would say, find things, learn from others. Again, he learned, about the tire business from somebody. And then he said, I can be independent and be better. I see they're buying appliances. I'm going to sell appliances. I see the people buying appliances are the ones who are building homes. I'm going to build homes. And he just keeps going through that,
I love it.
economic supply chain almost to look for
Yeah.
these opportunities. But you have to look for them, and you have to be willing to take a chance on yourself, work hard. And if it doesn't work out, pick yourself up, dust yourself off. One of the again family mottos is, don't judge a person for how many times they fall down, but how many times they get up.
Yeah.
I've learned far more. One of the things that scares me is success, because I don't really necessarily learn as much as I do when I fail. And I mean, there are lessons to be learned from success. I think we've learned from what worked at Centennial and what's worked at Tower Trust and what worked in the bank and what didn't. But boy, the lessons are really good when you fail. Again, I'm a lawyer and I'm a little bit of a historian, but years ago, before they had all the land records, they would use children to mark the property lines to land. And what they do is they take a small child between, it was a sexist society, so it was boys 8 to 12 years old, and because you only lived to you were 30 or whatever, and they would walk the property line. And you know what they did after they walked the property line? They'd whip the child, because pain is associated with memory. And so we remember and learn from our failures and our pain more than we do our successes. We start to give ourselves, I think, a little too much credit when it all
Yeah.
goes well, when sometimes it just went well and we got lucky. So
Yeah.
again, I'm rambling on you here.
Well,
So
I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think John Maxwell wrote the book that you're either winning or learning, right? And
mhm.
long term, the learners are the ones that are going to win, right? So
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I think it's the book, and I don't know who wrote it, called The Fifth Discipline. I don't know if you've read that one. And
sure have.
I think that the only competitive advantage an organization or individual has is their ability to learn. When you stop learning, you're dead. When
Yes.
when you but if you can continue to learn, whether it's from your successes or your failures, or we also have another family line, and that is smart people learn from their own mistakes. Wise people learn from the mistakes of others. If we can
Yeah.
learn from others, and again, work hard, work smart, work wise, then we've got a real chance to build a variety of businesses that people will love. And I'm gonna I know you talk about building businesses that are loved by their teams, their customers, and their communities.
Yep.
Implicit in that is that they're also loved by their owners.
Oh yeah.
It's the most important. It's first and last as far as I'm
Yep.
concerned. If you don't
Yep.
have the customer, the community, and the team, you won't be successful. But if you
That's right.
don't do it for the shareholder and the owner, um, then why are we doing it?
Yep.
I guess the last piece of advice, or maybe you got other questions, is don't fall in love with your business.
Yeah.
But do what you love. And there's a real distinct difference there, because
Yeah.
I've loved what I've done for every part of the last 37 years. But I didn't fall
Mhm.
in love with the business. I recognized the fact it was a means to an end. It was a business, and when I needed to change, if you fall in love with it, say you'll ride it to the bottom.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and that's not good for anybody to do.
Yeah. Well, wow. This has been an incredible conversation. Joe, really thank you for sharing this journey. It's it's very unique in the discussions that I've had, and it's just really been a pleasure to hear about the Depression era beginnings, the decades of banking leadership, and now to building thriving businesses in software, trust, real estate, uh, tax, and accounting. This has really been a remarkable conversation. So thank you
Yeah,
for
I
that.
appreciate the opportunity. As a part of my toast for my second daughter, she got married. I talked for a moment, if you don't mind me saying that, the old story is that, the journey is more important than the destination.
Yeah.
And I'm going to double down on that and leave you with this, and that is to say that even more important than the journey, or the most important part of the journey, is who you take the journey with.
Mm.
um, and whether that be, employees, customers, your family, or just in moments like this, the chance to reflect and just, I'm the season is, the season's a blessing right now, and I've been so blessed to have the opportunity to do what I've done, and I appreciate, what the gifts that God gave me to do that, and the gifts my parents gave me, and to be able to share that with other folks is, I hope there's the people can find some value in this. So thank you,
Yeah.
Nathan, for including me.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great parting thought for everyone. For people who want to follow you and the work that you're doing, Joe, or your companies, what's the best way to keep in touch? Or to
Wow, I'm not the best at social media. We do, all of our companies have social media influencers. So they've got the Centennial Tax has social media, and Tower Trust. We have a website for each of those, and then we have a family holding company website. Uh, let's
we'll put it
see.
in the show. We'll put it in the
You'll put
show
it, if
notes.
you put in the share information, it's I think it's
Yeah,
I don't even know. I don't even know what it is, but what it shows is what we do, how we do it, what companies we have, and as we add and grow our companies and have links in there,
yeah,
you'll be able to follow us there.
for sure. Love it. We'll do that. We'll include all those links in the show notes.
Thank you.
So, thanks for joining us, Joe. Listeners, thank you for tuning in for another episode of Building Love Businesses. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, follow the show and share it with another leader. Help us spread stories of these businesses that customers, employees, communities, and shareholders truly love. I'm Nathan Schock. We'll see you next time.